Very good morning to all of you, everyone. I'm so thankful once again to have you all joining us. Welcome back. We left off in 1 Kings 14 with the deaths of Rehoboam and Jeroboam, the first two kings of the divided kingdom of Israel and Judah. We pick up now in 1 Kings 15:1. Now in the 18th year of King Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, reigned Abijam over Judah. Now Abijam, he was first called Abijah, the son of Rehoboam, the first king of the southern kingdom. But it's in the 18th year that Abijah comes to power. Why is Rehoboam's son's name changed from Abijah to Abijam? Well, you must know that Abijam was an evil man, and I actually believe that it was his idea to change his name, given the meanings behind the names. Abijah, whom he was originally called, means my father is Jehovah, which is the name of the true God. But Abijam is my father is the sea, which is an idolatrous god. It's a false god. He probably worshipped a god of the sea. 3 years reigned he in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom. Couple of things to take note right here, real easy, real quick. Notice how he only reigns 3 years in Jerusalem. And also, his mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom. Remember that for just a few verses ahead when we're talking about Asa. But as you'll see over here, his father Rehoboam reigned for 17 years. But Abijah, he only reigned for 3 years, proof that God did not bless this man's reign. His son Asa, that comes after him, which we'll talk about here in just a minute, but his son Asa, he reigns for 41 years. Jeroboam, it's also worth noting, Jeroboam, the first king, he reigns for 22 years, and he sees four kings sit on the throne of David. Jeroboam was the one in whom first seen Solomon, and then he sees Rehoboam, Abijah, and Asa. He lives to see all four of these kings. Now let's continue with talking about Abijah. And he walked in all the sins of his father, which he had done before him, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father. Nevertheless, for David's sake did the Lord his God give him a lamp in Jerusalem, to set up his son after him, and to establish Jerusalem. Because David did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, and turned not aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, save only in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. That's such a painful thing to read. It's, David perfect before the Lord. Even though we've already went over David's reign and how many mistakes that he made, but there's one very notable one mistake that just sticks with his legacy now. All the wives that he had, the concubines, and how he disobeyed the Lord so many times, and he lied and he feared, and all these different times. None of those things are mentioned, except save only the matter of Uriah the Hittite. And there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of his life. Now the rest of the acts of Abijam and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And there was war between Abijam and Jeroboam. And Abijam slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David, and Asa his son reigned in his stead. And in the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, reigned Asa over Judah. So as we've already discussed, how Jeroboam finally gets to see this good king come up to reign over the southern kingdom while he's reigning over the northern kingdom, he is very afflicted, Jeroboam is, by some disease. And 41 years reigned he in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom. Now we just read about Asa's father, Abijam, and his mother was named Maacah. Well, it's just like how they say in David his father. This is the way the Jews talk. They don't say great-grandfather or grandfather. They just say father, meaning that they're ancestry. Charles Ellicott clarified this. He says Maacah was the wife of Rehoboam and therefore grandmother of Asa, the king that we're talking about right now. He's the grandmother of Asa and the wife of Rehoboam. She appears, however, still to have retained the place of queen mother to the exclusion of the real mother of the king, which does make one ponder what happened to Asa's mother. Why is his grandmother queen at this time? Well, Joseph Benson, he gives good comment on that. His grandmother's name may be here mentioned rather than his mother's, because his mother was either an obscure person or was dead or unwilling to take care of the education of her son, and so he was educated by the grandmother, who, listen to this, though she poisoned his father Abijam with her idolatrous principles, yet could not affect Asa. So this queen mother, Maacah, is the grandmother of Asa, the king, and she's an idolatrous woman. So idolatrous, in fact, that they talk about a grove where she had built up a phallic-like statue. And we know that there was sodomy in the land at that time, so there was worship of the phallic symbol, the male genitalia, if you will. Much like the Egyptian obelisk, this is what Asa's grandmother, Maacah, would have been worshiping in the grove, it's strongly believed. And Asa did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, as did David his father. And he took away the Sodomites out of the land, and removed all the idols that his fathers had made. And also Maacah, his grandmother, even her he removed from being queen, because she had made an idol in a grove, and as Asa destroyed her idol and burnt it by the brook Kidron. Here is an actual image of the brook Kidron. This was basically a place where they threw all the trash, got rid of all of it. It was a dumping area. But the high places were not removed. Nevertheless, Asa's heart was perfect with the Lord all his days. Now you may think that it's talking about him leaving up certain idolatrous places. That is not what Asa did. He destroyed those idolatrous places, but he left up these other high places where people had once worshipped the Lord. 2 Chronicles 14:3 tells us this, For Asa took away the altars of the strange gods and the high places, and brake down the images and cut down the groves. He got rid of all the idolatrous places. But apparently it was not pleasing to the Lord that he left up the ancient worship altars where they had worshipped him before. He wanted all those destroyed, and Solomon's temple to be the only place where they could worship God. And he brought in the things which his father had dedicated, and the things which himself had dedicated into the house of the Lord, silver and gold and vessels. And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. Now notice how the scripture mentions Baasha. Still talking about Asa, okay? But notice how it's not mentioning Nadab, whom is the successor to Jeroboam. It's not mentioning Nadab, Jeroboam's son, but it's going right to Baasha going to war with Asa. That's because Asa and Baasha, they had more dealings. Nadab had only reigned for 2 years. Then Baasha assassinates him. But it's mentioning Baasha right here. We're about to get into a little bit of info on Nadab, though. And Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and built Ramah, that he might not suffer any to go out or come in to Asa, king of Judah. Right here is Ramah. This would have been the pathway that they took into Judah and crossing the border. And this is where Baasha is taking control. And we are told in the book of Jeremiah how much that Asa, the king of Judah, how much that he feared Baasha. He actually built a pit, and Jeremiah makes a specific mention that he feared Baasha. Then Asa took all the silver and the gold that were left in the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and delivered them into the hand of his servants. And King Asa sent them to Ben-Hadad, the son of Tebramon, the son of Hezion, king of Syria, that dwelt at Damascus, saying, now we start to see Asa he's starting to crumble. He's starting to fall apart. He has a really, really good reign, but at the end of Asa's life, he really starts to go off the deep end a little bit. But for the most part, he reigns a very good reign, benefits most people. But right here we see him taking out the treasures in the house of the Lord. Now the Lord doesn't get angry with him over this. This is just a showing. Him taking the treasures out of the house of the Lord, out of the temple. This is just a showing of what the Lord really sees in his heart, and that is what God makes mention of. But apparently, Baasha, the king of Israel at this time that we're talking about, Baasha, he had an alliance with the king Ben-Hadad of Damascus, of Syria, up here. So they were in alliance, and Asa, the king of Judah, he sends these treasures to Ben-Hadad, trying to separate the two. He no longer wants them to be allied. There is a league between me and thee, Asa writes to Ben-Hadad. There is a league between me and thee, and between my father and thy father. Behold, I have sent unto thee a present of silver and gold. Come and break thy league with Baasha, king of Israel, that he may depart from me. So Ben-Hadad hearkened unto King Asa, and sent the captains of the host which he had against the cities of Israel, and smote Ijon, and Dan, and Abel Beth Maachah, and all Cinneroth, and all the land of Naphtali. So the king Ben-Hadad of Syria, he begins to attack right up here. And he starts conquering all of these lands, going down through north of the northern kingdom. And it came to pass when Baasha heard thereof that he left off building of Ramah and dwelt in Tirzah. Once again, Tirzah is the capital of the northern kingdom right now. It will soon be Samaria. Then King Asa made a proclamation throughout all Judah. None was exempted, and they took away the stones of Ramah and the timber thereof wherewith Baasha had builded, and King Asa built with them Geba of Benjamin and Mizpah. So everything that Baasha, the king of Israel, the northern kingdom, everything that he built up in Ramah, Asa has destroyed and uses that to build up these other settlements. The rest of all the acts of Asa and all his might and all that he did and the cities which he built, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Judah? Nevertheless, in the time of his old age, he was diseased in his feet. So we just seen how Asa, he took the treasures out of the house of the Lord, gave them unto the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, in order to help him. Well, right after that, we're told about Hanani, this seer, this prophet. He comes into Asa, and he rebukes him in the name of the Lord. Now listen to this, very close. And at that time Hanani the seer came to Asa king of Judah, and said unto him, Because thou hast relied on the king of Syria, and not relied on the Lord thy God, therefore is the host of the king of Syria escaped out of thine hand. Were not the Ethiopians and the Lubims a huge host with very many chariots and horsemen? Yet because thou didst rely on the Lord, he delivered them into thine hand. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show himself strong on the behalf of those whose heart is perfect toward him. Herein thou hast done foolishly. Therefore from henceforth thou shalt have wars. Now listen to Asa's response. Very unexpected response to this prophet. Then Asa was wroth with the seer, and put him in a prison house, for he was in a rage with him because of this thing. And Asa oppressed some of the people at the same time. He's even oppressing his people, keeping some of them. You can see he's going off the rails right here. Now this would have been in his old age. So the Lord is more angry with Asa over his heart, how he was more reliant upon Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, than he was upon the Lord's protection of him, as he was in his youth. Well, there's also one other matter that happens to Asa. And Asa in the 39th year of his reign was diseased in his feet, until his disease was exceeding great. Yet in his disease he sought not the Lord, but to the physicians. So this is another case where it's a lack of faith showing in this good King Asa. So what do the scholars think about this disease? What was wrong with his feet? Donald Wiseman says this: it is more likely, in view of Asa's age, the severity of the disease and death within 2 years to have been a peripheral obstructive vascular disease with ensuing gangrene. This is the disease that we're talking about right now. You can see the great progression going on. This gangrene will start to just spread throughout, and eventually, if you don't have your feet amputated or whatever limb that you don't have it amputated, you'll eventually succumb to it. And Asa slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David his father, and Jehoshaphat his son reigned in his stead. Okay, so right there we see the end of Asa's life, his son Jehoshaphat taking over. Now the Bible is going to go way back in reverse, about 40 years before the time that we're at right now. It's going to go all the way back 40 years, and we're going to come to the son of Jeroboam, Nadab. Now we're going to hear about him. And Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, began to reign over Israel in the 2nd year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned over Israel 2 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of his father, and in his sin wherewith he made Israel to sin. And Baasha, remember Baasha, the one that we were talking about. This is talking about the death of Jeroboam's son Nadab. And Baasha, the son of Ahijah of the house of Issachar, conspired against him, and Baasha smote him at Gibbethon, which belonged to the Philistines, for Nadab and all Israel laid siege to Gibbethon. So Nadab had led the Israelite army to attack the Philistine city of Gibbethon. While they were besieging it, Baasha assassinates Nadab and takes over the army and the nation of the northern kingdom. Even in the 3rd year of Asa, king of Judah, did Baasha slay him and reigned in his stead. Okay, now the next verse, something very important is going to happen. Alright, so we are talking about these 3 kings right here. We've went over Jeroboam, Nadab, whom we just got done talking about, and Baasha. We've talked about these 3, alright? Jeroboam, as you'll remember in just a few studies ago, Jeroboam was given the same promise as David, that if he obeyed the Lord and his commandments and his statutes, that he would give all these descendants would be from the lineage of Jeroboam. Jeroboam would have reign through his descendants all the way, all these many, many years. Well, we know that he doesn't obey the Lord. He falls from God into heavy idolatry. And Nadab, his son, is the very last link to Jeroboam. Because he disobeyed God, his descendants stop at Nadab. Only 2 years after his death. Only 2 years after Jeroboam's death does this occur, as we read right here. And it came to pass, when Baasha reigned, that he smote all the house of Jeroboam. He left not to Jeroboam any that breathed, until he had destroyed him, according unto the saying of the Lord, which he spake by his servant Ahijah the Shilonite. Now there's a good lesson in this between Jeroboam and his son Nadab. A very good lesson to learn real quick. In 2 Chronicles 11:14, we read about this, how Nadab, he was following lead from his father's example early on. We're even told it in 2 Chronicles. For the Levites left their suburbs and their possession and came to Judah and Jerusalem, for Jeroboam and his sons had cast them off from executing the priest office unto the Lord. So remember how we discussed in the last chapters about how Jeroboam would not allow the Levites to take over the ceremonies of this idolatrous worship. Well, it wasn't only Jeroboam, but his sons. So Nadab would have had a hand in also kicking the Levites out. So he was evil pretty early on, which should be another good lesson to parents and the responsibility that they have. Parents seem to have tremendous responsibility that a lot of them don't even seem to know, and if they do know it, they don't acknowledge it. And that is raising up your children. When you are blessed with a child, and I'm not, so I'm speaking secondhand here, but when you are blessed with a child, I can only imagine the great responsibility that you have to train them up in the ways of the Lord. Proverbs 22 says this, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now notice it says when he is old. That means that that seed will be planted and it will grow over time. They'll rebel a little bit, but they'll always come back to what you taught them. They'll remember that as long as it's in the way that he should go. So I do believe that there's this ripple effect that can come from having children that turn out either good or evil. You can be more blessed in heaven or more punished in hell, depending on how you raise up your children, because they're going to affect the world too. So we read about how Baasha has slaughtered Jeroboam's family now, all of his descendants, and this slaughter was allowed because of the Lord, because of the sins of Jeroboam which he sinned, and which he made Israel sin, by his provocation wherewith he provoked the Lord God of Israel to anger. Now the rest of the acts of Nadab, and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? And there was war between Asa and Baasha king of Israel all their days. In the 3rd year of Asa king of Judah began Baasha the son of Ahijah to reign over all Israel in Tirzah 24 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of Jeroboam, and in his sin wherewith he made Israel to sin. You'll see this will be a very common saying. Notice the color coding on all these names of these kings right here. Okay, you see red and you see green. The red indicates the bad kings, the evil, idolatrous kings. The green represents good kings that follow the Lord. You'll notice over here with the kings of Judah, the kings of the southern tribe, you'll notice that it's about 50-50. It is. It's about 50-50. There's a few other bad kings down here. But what I really want to focus on is this side, the northern kings. You'll notice there's not a single good one. Every one of these are said to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the very first. Every one of them are evil. There's only one that's really distinguished from these, and that is Ahab. Now, who shows up? The prophet that shows up during the time of Omri and Ahab? Elijah. And next week, Lord willing, we will be getting into their reigns. Ahab, the distinction made from the rest is that he is worse than Jeroboam. He actually does worse than all of these that we've talked about. And we'll talk about Elijah, Ahab, and Jezebel. God willing, next week. Thank you all for joining me once again. I hope that you learned something. Lord of peace be with you all. Amen.